everyone. I think we're live.
I think
I
we're
hope
live.
everyone's doing well. I think we're live. So, um, just saying hello. Happy Thursday.
Happy
It's
Thursday, everyone.
February 13th, a day
Mm-hmm.
before Valentine's Day. So we thought this would be a great time, to chat everybody up. Yeah, give some
Mm-hmm.
love.
Some love.
I'm Miranda.
Hi, I'm Stephen G. Fullwood. How are you doing?
If you can actually hear us and you're out there in the world,
Let us know.
Um, let us know. We're very interested to know if all of you folks who may be watching this on YouTube are
Mhm.
there and can hear us. Um, I've been trying to figure this out. I don't, this be a lot easier to figure out how
Mhm.
to record live on, because we're on Riverside, record live on Riverside and stream to YouTube.
Exactly.
Yes. But okay, good. Lee can hear us.
Hey, Lee.
But it's actually, hey, Lee, it's actually a little bit harder. Maybe it's my age. I don't know. It's a little bit harder than I thought it would be. I thought it would be like, press and
Mhm.
play. And that hasn't
Exactly.
happened. But, we're happy to be here with you regardless. And
Mhm.
we hope that you, afford us a little grace as we figure out this
Mhm.
new
Mhm.
world called YouTube.
Yes. So we're really happy that you're here. Miranda, how are you feeling, though?
I'm doing really good. It's kind of nice. A Thursday evening. It's been a good
Mhm.
week. Stephen and I taught a great class yesterday on archives, and so we're kind of um, jazzed about being
Yeah.
together physically. Stephen and I, we're the founders of the Nomadic Archivists Project, and we talk and work together
Mhm.
all the time. Oh, my mom's in the audience. Hi, Mom. Um,
Hi.
Yeah, we talk all the time, but it's always virtual because I'm in Western New York and Steven's in Harlem.
Harlem, baby.
Um, yes, but this week I'm in the city with Steven, so we had you know, a chance to kind of catch up in person
Mhm.
yesterday. How are you
Yes.
feeling?
I'm feeling great. It was great seeing you yesterday, great being in class with a wonderful group of students who were interested in archives and trying to figure out how they could use them in their work, but also how to make archives really legible for different kinds of people. And so I love this particular format because we get to talk with you guys about your interest in archives and approach it from various different ways. And so today we're going to be talking about Zora Neale Hurston, specifically her
Yeah.
archives. And we have some
Yeah.
questions for you. Miranda, do you want to ask the questions or should I?
Yes. Okay. So this is actually the last time that we got together for a YouTube live, Stephen and I, was around the time or like during when LA was sort of on fire. Um, and so we did a talk and we had a conversation with you all around um around dealing with loss, in particularly,
Mhm.
our material things, the things that we hold most dear, the things that are kind of irreplaceable.
Mhm.
Um, and this next follow up, we continue a little bit on this theme of loss
Mhm.
and how to, protect our things from, all different forms of loss. I mean, at that point, it was
Mhm.
about natural disasters, but, sort of as we touched on last time, it could be from a lot of different things.
Mhm.
And the reason why we're talking about Zora today is because, and Stephen's going to get into this more, and talk a little bit about Zora's archives and her things, is because after she passed away, her materials were burned, right? Or were
Mhm. Yes, we're in the
the
process of
person,
burning. Yes.
yes, they were
Mhm.
in process of burning and then rescued. And so we're
Mhm.
going to kind of like just talk a little bit about that and talk about like how can we protect our things after we're
Mhm.
gone, from the same kind of fate. So we're going to get into it about Zora. So we're going to talk a little bit about who Zora is or was,
Mhm.
and a little bit about her archives, her materials, and then kind of think
Mhm.
about it in terms of like us and our journey.
Mhm.
So I think it's going to be interesting. We really want everybody to kind of be in conversation with us. We're hopefully we'll
Mhm.
stop And, definitely want you to share your own stories. If you know Zora in any kind of way, if you've read any of her books or are a scholar of Zora's work, we definitely invite you to add some comments, but also then to sort of just talk about what we're here to talk about today, which is really, our afterlives. What are we doing with all the stuff that we have? So I'm going to let Stephen kick it off, because Stephen is actually just gave a talk about Zora, and so he can talk a little bit more about that.
Yes.
He's got a cat.
I have a very large cat named Amsterdam Thelonious, AT for short. And he is feeling very affectionate and wants to get on my lap. So I'm going to just accommodate him as we begin this conversation or continue this conversation about Zora Neale Hurston. The reason why we're talking about Zora is because, one, she's amazing. Two, last week, Barnard College held an inaugural, actually 2 weeks ago, an inaugural Zora Neale Hurston festival. And it was like an award or two. What my friend called it was more like a revival than a conference or a festival. It's like people were so happy. They were studying Zora from a variety of different ways, as an anthropologist, a folklorist, as the first Black woman documentarian to have her work at the Library of Congress, essentially. And so by the end of the 1930s, Zora had produced several novels, including her award-winning The Rise of Watching God, which most people know, if they haven't read, but they know the title. And so Zora was the most prolific and successful Black woman writer of that time. But she was also a nomad. She traveled a lot. She moved from place to place, which makes it hard for people to maintain archives, one. And by the time the 1960s rolled around, 1960 specifically, she passed away. Well, she was living in a house where her landlord...
Stephen, will you speak up a little bit? I think your volume might be low.
Sure. Let me just this up. How about that? Does that sound... How about that? Okay. Hello?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Other people.
So I'll go back. So Zora Neale Hurston, for those of you who don't know, anthropologist, folklorist, fictionist, short story writer, playwright, just did a number of things. And so she was active during the Harlem Renaissance movement, towards the end of the Harlem Renaissance movement, say late 20s, early 30s. And she traveled to the South and to the Caribbean. And she was really thoughtful about the ways in which she captured, or not captured, but documented Black folks' culture. And she wasn't very clear-eyed about it, wasn't romantic about it. And so she was, for me, one of those people. I'm very interested in preserving Black cultures in the U.S., but also outside the U.S., in the ways that privilege the culture first, as opposed to putting specific things and ideas on it. And so she died in 1960, as I mentioned, and she was living in a house where her landlord ordered that her materials be burned. And so the materials were burning, and there was this, she knew a law officer, this guy named Patrick Duval, who was passing by the house and saw the smoke and was like, what's going on here? So he goes there, puts out the fire, and then those materials that survived are now at the University of Florida's libraries. And it's the largest collection of her work, but it's still not as substantial as it could have been. Hence the word nomad, hence the word moving around, hence the word, these things that can impact the ways in which you keep things, right? If things go into storage, you forget to pay the storage, or you have to move, or you can't afford to. We don't know what the stories are. And if I had more time, I would have done more research around where she was, what her addresses were, and how she lived in Boston. She lived in DC, New York, Edenville, where she grew up. She died in Fort Pierce, Florida. So these things can really have an impact on archives specifically. And so there's more volume. Is the volume okay now, Miss Pat? I hope it is. And so some of the questions that we were thinking about earlier around, how does Zora's story relate to you? And I think, so Miranda, what I think you mentioned this before, that when it comes to family history or cultural histories, we'll have a responsibility to save it. And the reason why we don't necessarily have to save it for a cultural institution, an archives or library, but we can save it for our family members, for our communities. So there are different ways in which we can document our work and archive our work. And these things do make a difference when, as I like to say, I'm from the future and I know there's someone looking for you. So what are you going to do about that? And you can make a choice. But the point is to make a choice, to decide to keep your archive or decide not to keep your archive. So,
right. And I think the last time that we talked about this, we were really talking about like all the things that we've lost and, you know, the impact it's had on us as being alive, things that might have belonged to other people that, you know, no longer, you know, we no longer have. We were talking about the memory of having it. And so this time it's kind of like thinking about a little bit more about, instead of the things that we've lost, but thinking future forward, like you were saying, Stephen, like who's going to be looking for us in the future? And what are we hoping that they find? And what I thought was interesting about Zora's papers is that so much of Zora's life, the work that she did, her publications were heavily edited.
yes.
They were edited because of the patrons that she, you know, they were funding her work and research. They were edited because of the authors, what people thought people would actually read and buy, I guess more importantly, when it comes to publishing. And when her papers were finally available for people to look at, they could see like a lot of her deeper thoughts and her complete thoughts on subjects that weren't censored. And so that's also really interesting to think about, not only the things that we're interested in, you know, passing forward, but how we're sort of curating that sort of that image of ourselves. So I'm going to put it to people in the chat, and I'm really sorry. I don't know actually how it works, but I guess there was 2 YouTubes out there of this live stream. So some people are kind of hanging out in the other one, but I put the link. Thanks to Tanya, I put the link to this one in here, and I feel like I hope that, you know, 3 months from now we're not still trying to.
We're still working out
the
the kinks and the technology
of all of this stuff. That's a little bit more seamless, but so sorry for the folks who were just kind of like hanging out on the
waiting for us,
on the other video, So, anyways, like, what do other people think about sort of like their afterlives, the things that they're thinking about ensuring that they're around after they're gone, or are people thinking that they want everything burned?
Yeah, because these are choices.
They're choices, and if you don't, I think Stephen and I see this all the time. If you're not explicit, even if you are explicit about what you want to happen to your things after you're gone, if you're not explicit about it, it could, you know, other people own it at some point, and they could do what they want. So we don't know if Zora wanted her stuff to be archived and, you know, like out there for the world to look at and to read some of her works. We have no idea, but she made no, as far as we know,
we don't know exactly
for her things. And I think about this in terms of Aretha Franklin, and passing away the same way and just having no plan for any of her things. And so at that point you kind of just, I don't know. And then maybe it doesn't matter. Some people, it doesn't matter. Once they're gone, and whatever happens, happens.
Right. Exactly. I have a cat that wants,
he's really crazy over there.
Feisty. I thought he was tired and was going to go sit down. Stop. Nope.
Okay, let me go to the chat.
Yes, so, please go to the chat. While I take care of AT. AT, go. Go sit.
And let me make sure that there's... Sit. So, what do people think? What are your thoughts? I don't know if there's a lag either. Let us know if you're hearing a lag for us.
My cat.
Masa. I don't see anything, so I see, we'll just keep talking.
We'll keep talking. So another one of the questions we had was, this idea of how to make arrangements for your archives. So these could be expressed in your will. It could be expressed in letters. It could be expressed in a number of ways. But typically you might want to look into something that's legal, like a will, because that means you can't contest. Well, you can contest it, but it makes your interest known in what to do with your archives. I mentioned this before in other interviews that there's a friend of mine who wants all of his journals burned upon death. And if I'm the executor or just someone who's looking, to make sure this is happening, I'm going to do that. I'm going to make sure his work is destroyed as he requested, because that's his wishes. And so although we're archivists, we're very interested in archiving from the ground up. We're not looking at the interest of the state or institutions. We're looking at what people want to do. That's really critical to us.
Right.
And that's why we started our organization. So Tanya is saying, let's see what Tanya is saying. Tanya says, but if a person is gone and can't control their archive, their narrative, who decides to speak for them? And that's a really good question, because I've seen several examples of people who have assumed what somebody might want because they had no will. And so it's kind of sad, because sometimes what happens here is we hope that son or daughter or spouse or friend has that person's best interest in mind and not their own. And a person's archive usually tells the story. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It absolutely does.
Well, so interesting enough too, and I think it was Ann Petrie, right, who wrote Harriet Tubman. In her archives, because I was, reading through her journals, and it says, I hope that no one ever reads this. I hope these archives these journals are destroyed so that people wouldn't be able to, read her inner thoughts. And then they weren't. They were actually sold and are publicly available. But I mean, I think it's a good point, because I don't know. I mean, people spend so much of their time curating like how people see them, especially if you're a public figure. And then you're right, Tanya, like if somebody's archives tell a different story or tell a fuller story of who that person was, whether they wanted that story out there or not, and who decides to do that is actually kind of critical. But again, if you're gone, you're no longer the voice. You're no longer the one who instructs. You're no longer the one who can weigh in on that decision. Stephen, I think, like, what was it like with I don't even know if you could talk about it, but like the Baldwin estate with James Baldwin?
I can't really talk about it, but I will say that it was, so what Miranda's referring to in general is that there's behind the counter talk, is what a friend of mine called it, and then there's in front of the counter talk. I can only talk about the in front of the counter talk, and that is I led an archival team of processing the James Baldwin papers, which was the last collection I processed at the Schomburg Center. And the collection came in the end of January 2017. It was processed and made available to the public in mid-April. And this is the most comprehensive collection of his work. There are collections of work at Yale, at Emory, and other places. And so, but I was under strict instructions from the estate and the New York Public Library at the time not to talk about it until it was processed. And then I could talk about the collection. But again, I can't talk about the behind the scenes with it, but there's some complications there. And in the future, that will probably be revealed.
Okay. All right.
Best I can put it.
I was going to jump to Lorraine Hansberry, but I guess that might be complicated to talk about as well.
Lorraine Hansberry is a little more easier to talk about, because so Lorraine Hansberry was a African American playwright. Everyone knows their eyes are watching God. This A Raisin in the Sun, which was her most famous play, has been done over and over again, published. There's films about it. And so with Lorraine's papers, when she passed away, she had bequeathed her estate to her ex-husband that she had divorced, I think, in 1964, Robert Nemiroff. Robert Nemiroff began to collect material, I think, in 1966, to help build out Lorraine's papers, which was really kind of remarkable. So their original letters she sent to other people, photographs, and other things that helped to augment the material. Lorraine Hansberry died when she was 34 years old. And although she was very prolific, the majority of her work wasn't published until she passed. There's still not a lot of stuff that's published, but so we processed the collection, and there was a part of the collection that was being held that's still under, you have to ask the permission from the estate to have access to it, which is normal. It's not very uncommon, but the bulk of her work is available to the public, and it's tremendous. It's her play scripts, her poetry, short stories, letters, drawings. Hansberry was she was an intellectual. And I think I remember hearing Imani Perry, who wrote Looking for Lorraine, this amazing book. She said that had Lorraine lived, she would have given James Baldwin a run for his money. She was that top tier intellectual. And I was in love with her beforehand. And then I just felt like the gods had bestowed upon me this opportunity to process this collection. And every collection has a story, a provenance, where it started, who did it, where it came from, and how it comes to institutions. And the archivists have all these great stories at times about papers, about interfacing with either that person or their estate. And these are really great things. They help us understand the complications sometimes, or how things get to where they need to be by the time you see them. And I think Pat has a question or an opinion or a comment. I'm not sure. Let's see. Okay. So Pat says, my opinion is to not put your wishes in a will that won't be read immediately, but to write an end-of-life letter and make sure it is available to those who would have an interest. Great story. Great story. Thank you, Pat. I agree with you. I agree with you. This is pretty awesome. But Pat, I would ask you this. Who would you give that end-of-life letter to? Or would it only be one person or several people? For me, my will is with my best friend, and I plan to give it to a couple of other people as well. But now I plan to write them an end-of-life letter and let them know what my wishes are. Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, great.
I
great.
can hear you.
Hi.
Yeah. So actually, I blame you dropping out on Tanya, because before this started, she was like, what if Stephen disappears from the screen? And you did. So.
Oh, Tanya, you cursed us. You cursed us. I don't believe in stuff like that, but you did. That's what you did. So, yeah.
But I was thinking about, so before Stephen dropped out and we were talking, we've been talking about people who, a little more famous or renowned in terms of like their materials. But I think about like family materials and the things that we have. Okay, so Lisa's that he can hear you too, so that's good.
Oh, great, great.
And, thinking about, like our stuff, our personal stuff. And as Pat, who is my mother, was saying that she'd give it to her kids, that she'd do it end of life. But I was thinking about like the stories that we make up about people and things that happen when we don't know, when we don't have any sort of like records. So, like the myths, like the family myths that get spread because we don't have any other sort of like tangible evidence. So we don't have like diaries, or we don't have letters, or, certain things that we can like draw on. And they're no longer here. We don't have all the histories of different people. And so then we start filling in the gaps after people pass away. And I think about that a lot. Is it, especially for people who want to a little bit, who are thinking more about like, I'd love to be forgotten. I don't, I'm so worried about what happens to some of these really intimate thoughts that I might keep like in a journal. What might happen to it if it gets out.
Right.
But then I also think about the other side of that, of people just starting to imagine who you are, especially if you're somebody who doesn't vocalize and share those things. Does anybody else think about that? Like sort of like the family stories, or the myths that sort of get spread? And Tanya says that there's also a little bit of a lag here, so I'm not sure how much people are hearing in real time.
That's a really good point, though, having the draw on the evidence of what someone did. However, that person might be private, you know. I think a lot about as a genealogist, and I put quotes up because I feel like you need to really earn the title. I've been keeping family records for quite some time and doing research, and I think about who was going to want to know about their great-grandparents, their great-aunts, cousins, and other assorted people. And I feel like that's my responsibility to make that happen, to put that information out there. And so that feels like an imperative. It feels like a mission. It feels like an assignment. So, but I didn't always feel that way. I had to learn and to think about the role of genealogy and how it shapes our communities and shapes who we think we are. And that when stories are lost, like I found out about my great granddad, and apparently he was about my size. I'm about 5'9", but that he was a very loud man, apparently, according to his daughter. And they could hear him coming down the dirt road because they knew that he was at home because he was talking. And I was like, oh, that tracks, I guess. That's kind of cool. But I mean, besides a little like anecdotal information like that, I think about who he was. He worked, he had his farm, he was he had 15 kids. And so there are all these things that I like knowing about and kind of imagining. He never left a diary. He didn't leave any, wasn't able to do an oral history with them, but one of his daughters, my Aunt Ruby, is exceptionally, like an amazing memory, was able to tell me more about him and her mom and her siblings and their children. And so I've interviewed her 4 times. I plan on interviewing her again because I feel like she wants to talk. She wants to tell these stories. And so it's my job to be of use to her and of use to my family to be able to share those stories. So, yeah.
Right.
I don't see anyone in the chat,
you know, like one of the things that I did, I don't even know, maybe 20 years ago now, is I really wanted to understand who my grandmother was because I never got to know my grandmother because she passed away when I was really young. This is my father's mother. And so I started to interview all of her kids. She had, 10 kids, but one passed away at birth. And so I started to interview all of my aunts and uncles to kind of get this. And I interviewed them separately, but I kept asking them the same questions because, of course, there were 10 of them. Sorry, there were 10 kids. They ranged from 20 years. My father's the youngest, and my Uncle Sonny was the oldest. And so I actually started with my Uncle Sonny. Okay. And I just kept asking them about their childhood to kind of piece together what it was like.
That's a good way.
And so asking them different questions and they all remembered things very differently. I mean, there was obviously a through line, but and then things got, life happened and things got busy, but I had all these oral histories of all of my aunts and uncles that I had recorded. And of course, as things happen, people have passed away. But I had all these recordings, and some people, some of my cousins or different family members didn't have anything with their voices. And so I was thinking about that, so I would then, share these oral histories with people, so they could have them, as, remembrances. But I was, kind of thinking about that. Some of the things got really personal, and I don't know how many people they actually shared it with. And I was thinking, even though this is their child or somebody else, would they? Yeah, because when I was speaking to them about it, we didn't talk about what would happen to these recordings, what would happen to them, who would get to listen to them. So it's interesting. It's kind of like this delicate space that you're in when it comes to these really private and intimate things that we have, that we sometimes think. Right. We don't know what the impact will be on somebody else once we put them out there.
And that's interesting because in those interviews, they're actually making this public to you, but not public, right? And so I like the intentionality in the sense, I like your sensitivity around it, right? And then there's also what could be gatekeeping in a way, because if you're telling you the story,
right.
There are stories that take years to be told. And, so and then there's stories that are never told. And I just wait on the stories that are being told. A lot of on my mom's side and dad's side, both my parents have passed away and a lot of their siblings have. So I've just been trying to be more careful and thoughtful about how I approach people, because there's grief, and then there's extended grief. And then there's, you want to consider people's feelings while you're trying to get story, while you're trying to understand family history. And so that's interesting that you did all that work, and now you have these really unique primary resources that really could be really healing for some people, in some ways.
I think so. I mean, I have shared them and it has been appreciated. I've only shared it within the family, but I was thinking about what you were saying about you have all your stuff that you would then pass on to a friend of yours. And so, kind of thinking about that, then they sort of decide what happens. And there might be things that are really private that you only want them to know or have. I don't know. It gets kind of crazy. And these are kinds of things you have to think about. Or maybe not. Maybe just let it go.
I will say that for my
best.
I will say that for my archive. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I will say that for my own archive, there are sensitive things, but they are things that I feel, depending on the day, how I feel about them, they're going to stay in the archive. Right. That's clear. I might close them and say, "Don't open this box until such and such." But the kind of person I am and the kind of life that I endeavor to lead, I want to lead a relatively open life, right? That may not be the case for obviously a lot of people. For people who want their, as we mentioned, the MP3 journals. I hope no one ever reads this, and then they end up at a library. Those are complicated things. It makes me, and I love archives and I love reading letters, but there are things. I probably wouldn't have done it if I were a curator. Probably wouldn't have accepted them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very sensitive. So how do you see, let's bring it back to Zora, because we were talking about finding Zora, and we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. So do you see that there's like a parallel journey with like your,
that's interesting,
you're doing your work with Zora?
So I've never thought about it that way. She's a folklorist and anthropologist. What I feel is more in terms of collecting story, I guess maybe that's the through line. When it comes to archiving voices in the Black LGBTQ community here in the U.S., elsewhere, and elsewhere, I feel a responsibility to my community to do those things, to help document and put down our history for generations to come. So yeah, I just never thought about it as parallel. I feel like Zora, she's an extraordinary writer. She was an extraordinary thinker and had a great sense of humor. The book that Alice Walker edits called "I Love Myself When I Am Laughing, and Then Again When I Am Looking Mean and Impressive." That's the best title ever, right? And it's a good introduction to Zora Neale Hurston. It contains a really wonderful introduction by Mary Helen Washington, the scholar, as well as snippets of Zora's own work, so you get a sense of her from her words. And I feel very grateful that people like Zora, like Langston, like Hansberry, Tony K. Bombard, Toni Morrison, these people wrote about us or studied us or collected folklore about us. I never thought about myself in that vein because I'm sitting at their knee trying to figure out how to do the work better and better and better until I'm past. But I only, yes, I think she's a Capricorn. I see that. That's similar. She was born, I think, in, January. So we have that in common, I think. Yeah, January 7th.
And I put a link.
Yes.
January 7th.
Yes.
Okay. I put a link to a really interesting PBS
American Experience
video documentary. Yeah, American Experience
by the lovely Tracy Strain,
which is actually interesting because Zora took a lot of video footage.
Yeah, she did.
And so there's a lot of archival footage in this documentary, but it's definitely Zora's. And I think there's a lot of singing where it would capture Zora's voice singing. Do you know who is that at the Folklife Center? Do you know if that was Alan Lomax who did that?
I don't know if it was
At
Alan
one point
Lomax.
she was traveling with them.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a good question, but I believe her resources are at the Library of Congress, so they're fairly easy to track. So it's great to hear her voice. So yeah, that's awesome.
It is. It is. But the work that she was doing with capturing Black Southern life, I feel like is similar to the work that we do as archivists.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
And that connection to the people that she was working with, I think she felt very connected and felt like she needed to represent them in a way that I think within the field, there was a lot of dehumanization that was going on. And so she was trying to correct that.
There are these moments where Tracy Heather Strain is the filmmaker for this Zora Neale Hurston film. And she and I were talking, well, actually, she was at the Zora Neale Hurston conference, and she said this on the panel, that the way that the people that she's filming look at her, they look at her in a loving, kind way. So she's not an interloper or a person disrupting their lives. She's telling them to stand this way or stand that way. And she deliberately chose clips that showed that connection. And I think that that kind of folklore, that kind of anthropologic approach, I think is necessary if you're going to do that kind of work, to really not just embed yourself in the community, but be a part of it, and be kind to people. And so she was born in the South. I think Zora attributes her way of being to chat with people and talk with them because she's from there. And she was a person who had great curiosity. So yeah.
Right. Well, I hope people, I'm guessing that a lot of people already know who Zora is, but if you don't, check out. And her latest, she actually just published a book.
Yeah.
No, but
yeah, this is a book.
One of the first books she ever wrote was never published. And so it was recently published in what was it, 2018?
I think so.
Barracoon? Yeah.
Yeah.
So just an amazing person. And so we found her. We found you, Zora. No, she's never been lost.
You've never been lost, Zora, and I'm so glad that Alice Walker went looking for you in 1973 to put a headstone on your grave, and yes, and inspired so many men and women to follow your example. So thank you, Alice, and thank you, Zora.
All right. And thank you to everybody who stuck with us today. I know it was a little
wonky.
No. Wonky. I still got to figure out how to connect to YouTube. I don't know. I'm so surprised though that Lee and Pat, that you both found us in the beginning. I feel like that's pretty impressive.
Yes.
I don't know how you did it, so I'm gonna check in with you later to see
figure that out.
What worked, what didn't work. Yes. But anyways, we're happy to be here with you. We plan to do this once a month. What we're going to talk about next month, I don't know. Do you know, Stephen?
I don't know, but we've been trying to basically keep it, what do you call it? There's public affairs, or no, what is it? Contemporary, in terms of things that are happening with us. I was trying to think of the class that I took in college, and it was current affairs or something of that nature.
Current affairs, yeah. We're keeping it very
current. Trying to, and related to archives.
Very headline.
Because archives are everywhere. And actually, recently, who got fired, Miranda? Who recently was fired?
Who recently was fired? You mean the archivist?
Yes.
The archivist of the United States?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
we'll see how that develops. I'm so worried about the National Archives at this point, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, so yeah, maybe that's what we'll be talking about next time.
Maybe
hopefully
so.
Not. But yes, if you like this video, definitely subscribe. To the channel so that we can notify you. Hopefully you got notified that we were going live today. And if you stuck around with us today, we are very grateful.
We're so grateful. Thank you so much.
We hope that you enjoyed the talk. And
we will get better. Our tech will get better.
Yes.
Trust us.
Yeah, just hang.
Just listen.
But we hope you guys have a great night and a wonderful weekend. Great Valentine's if you're into that kind of thing. If you celebrate, lots of love to everyone, and have a good night.
Take care.
We'll see if we can end the session for everybody. Let's see.
Let's see.